Welcome to the Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Michael Baranowski, a political scientist at Northern Kentucky University. With me today is my regular co-host, Cleveland area attorney and Republican factotum, Jay Carson.
All right. Hey,
Hey,
Mike.
Jay. So, we went on so long for our Saturday show that it was all about elections. I kind of thought that might happen, and we didn't have the opportunity to talk about, I think, two pretty important stories that were in an already packed week, and that is, first off, President Trump firing Jeff Sessions as the Attorney General, and secondly, the president's proclamation in which he denied us, which would essentially deny asylum to certain folks. And so it seemed to me that would make a lot of sense for us to take our Wednesday show and talk about those two issues. So if you're ready,
Sounds good.
we can jump right in. So let's start with the Sessions thing. I mean, obviously, President Trump didn't waste any time in getting rid of Jeff Sessions. And he's been at odds with his now former Attorney General from the very day that Jeff Sessions, I would say honorably and rightly, recused himself from supervising the Mueller investigation. And really, in every single other way, Jeff Sessions has been an absolute dream of an attorney general, at least if you're a hardcore law and order conservative.
I like them.
Yeah, he was particularly a very enthusiastic supporter of Donald Trump's strong stance against undocumented immigrants. And that's one of the few policies where Donald Trump seems to actually really care and have, it's not just of convenience, but something he really believes in. And Jeff Sessions was right there along with him, right? So now with Sessions gone, oversight of the Mueller investigation looks like, for now at least, it's going to be in the hands of acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker. And he, of course, in the past has made statements suggesting that, well, the Mueller investigation might have gone a little bit too far afield, might have been going on too long, that sort of thing. And in addition to that, it's not entirely clear that the president's appointment of Whitaker is constitutionally valid. There are some experts, including notably White House Counselor Kellyanne Conway's spouse, who claim that this appointment has some constitutional issues. Now, there are some statutory things here, Jay, that sort of go both ways. There's the Attorney General Succession Act, which says that, and that seems to be a law that's pretty on point, obviously. It says that the Deputy Attorney General, and that would be Rod Rosenstein, takes over until a replacement can be confirmed. But then there's the Federal Vacancies Reform Act that gives the president the power to name anyone in the Department of Justice who's been serving at a high level for 90 days to a vacant attorney general position in an acting capacity. And as the chief of staff to Jeff Sessions, Whitaker would qualify. And it seems to me that legislation would have precedence because it was passed after the Attorney General Succession Act. But then there's Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2 of the Constitution, which of course trumps any of those laws, that says that principal officers, and that would include the Attorney General, must be appointed with the advice and consent of the Senate. So I thought before we get into the policy thing, maybe we could talk about the legal issue here. What's your take on this, on the whole constitutionality of Whitaker actually being appointed acting Attorney General?
Well, I think Trump's. I think you're right. Trump's within his authority to appoint him as acting Attorney General. He will have to get confirmed. I think that's the next step. And again, this just happened, Wednesday morning. so it's understandable that the Senate has not been able to convene to give it advice and consent. And it's also unclear whether Whitaker would be the actual Attorney General that Trump would appoint. There might be someone else out there, but he's sort of the guy who's doing the job in the meantime. I think that's what's going to happen. Certainly, Republicans in the Senate will insist upon it. I don't think just because of it's the prerogative of the Senate, they're not going to let that slip away and just say, oh, well, we'll just allow this appointment to go unconfirmed and have him be indefinitely acting attorney general. So
Yeah,
my sense
and
is
Mitch
there'll be
McConnell.
discussions in the next. Yeah.
I mean, McConnell has said that he expects this to be a very brief acting attorney general period, which clearly suggests that he plans on moving very quickly to confirm someone. And certainly now,
Right.
well, I mean, the Republicans have the numbers to confirm whoever, Whitaker or anyone else, certainly. But Democrats will certainly use the process, if it's Whitaker or anyone else, to highlight what they feel might be, negative effects, particularly regarding the Mueller probe. But I wanted to get so kind of moving into that policy aspect of it. First off, in terms of just the firing in the first place. Now, some on the left, particularly, are saying, well, this is just a shocking abuse of power and so forth. And to me, that's not my sense. Is attorney generals tend to, they don't tend to necessarily last all that long. And it's very
Sure.
common after midterms for presidents to shake up their upper staff. And so to me, it's not like that's like so many of the things that Donald Trump has done are just kind of outside the bounds of normalcy when it comes to the president. This, not so much. It's maybe more that Donald Trump has just so telegraphed his great eagerness to do this, and he did it as soon as humanly possible. And, there are some people are saying, well, this is part of a grand strategy to do X, Y, Z. And honestly, again, this gets to me to that. Do you want to see Donald Trump as the four-dimensional chess master, or do you just want to see, as I kind of see it more, as Donald Trump tending to act and react at a personal peak? And to me, that to me is the simplest.
Sessions kind of pissed him off, and
Yeah.
he fired him.
Yeah.
I don't see any. Now, again, there's going to be this sort of idea of no matter who Trump would appoint, that this is going to be someone it's conspiratorial because, Trump obviously supports whoever it is he nominates, and therefore there's a quid pro quo that this person will get rid of Mueller and stop the investigation or whatever. Again, that I don't see any evidence for that. And look, I think you've got to realize, I mean, the attorney general is not a separate branch of government, right? This is part of the executive branch, and he is subject to being fired by the president at the president's will. Now, if the president were to do things, take steps to try to subvert a ongoing investigation or something like that, obstruct justice, that's a different matter. But it's also not. It's also certainly allowable that the attorney general ought to have some sort of oversight over the investigations that are being, that are going on. So,
yeah, and I think certainly it seems that Rosenstein seems to be more of a supporter of the Mueller investigation than from what little we've seen from it. But then again, on the other hand, and maybe this is me trying too hard to be, I don't know, to look for the sort of non-sensationalist view, is that when Whitaker made some of his comments, he was making them in a very different position with access to less information, presumably, than he will have as acting attorney general. And so I'm trying not to jump to conclusions. Now, it could be by the time this airs, and we're recording this on Saturday to air on Wednesday, it could be that all of a sudden Whitaker fires, ends the Mueller investigation. All of a sudden, then everything I say goes out the window. But
yeah, I don't see that happening.
No, I'm betting that doesn't happen.
I don't even see, and I don't think Whitaker is going to be the next attorney general.
Yeah.
That would be sort of a strange. Again, usually with cabinet officials, you pick someone who is a politician, rightly or wrongly, or is sort of well known in the bureaucracy. And Whitaker is, he's the next guy under, but I don't think he's got. He's certainly not Jeff Sessions. So,
well, I think that the issue is he's not the next guy under. That would be Rosenstein, but it's pretty clear that President Trump is no fan of his, which is why he essentially bypassed him to appoint Sessions chief of staff. And again, there are a couple ways to look at this. Is this his is Trump the grand strategist, or just Trump saying, I hate this guy, and so I'm gonna appoint somebody else. And to me, that's kind of
Yeah.
more. But I think from a political standpoint, given what we think we know about where the Mueller investigation is at, which is pretty close to the end, it seems like, that it probably makes a lot more sense to let it play out politically than to just cause a huge firestorm.
Oh,
By
absolutely. Yeah.
now, whether or not the president will see it that way, who knows? He's always the wild card in this. But I think that there are a lot of people who are telling him, let's let this play out and don't. And I think what you're arguing in part is that Whitaker, as a political animal, understands this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah.
Or let's put this, it would be certainly be problematic and would seem to be strange for someone who is, again, not the second in command, but sort of the third, or sort of on a different command tree, if you will. Do all of a sudden jump in and say, I'm terminating the investigation. That just sends up red flags all over the place.
Yeah. Definitely.
So it's much more sensible to say, hey, I'm the guy who's filling in right now, and I'm just going to steady as she goes until we get somebody confirmed by the Senate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. I think you're right on that. Before we move on, I wanted to ask you, so how would you overall evaluate Sessions' tenure as Attorney General?
I'd say pretty good. I disagreed with him on some of the pushing on the federal marijuana stuff and the fight. I mean, but to some extent, look, maybe that's a fight that you need to have. And what I'm saying is, of course, federal law outlaws marijuana. It's still a prohibited substance. Some states, have made it legal. And what do you do when you run into those kind of issues where something is legal under state law and illegal under federal law? The Constitution would tell you that the federal law trumps the state law, and the experience up to had been sort of, well, we'll just kind of look the other way. And look, it's I don't know that that's the right constitutional thing to do. So, again, it's one of those. It's not a good hill to fight on for him, or it wasn't a good hill to fight on, but he still did it, and I sort of appreciate that. Otherwise, I think he's done a good job. There's nothing that jumps out at me. All right. I mean, there may be stuff that jumps out at you of stuff that he did that was somehow extraordinary or different than what you would expect of a just regular attorney general.
Well, to me, it's sort of a case.
I mean, I guess, do you have anything that jumps out as like,
Well, I guess.
Yeah. What scares you about Sessions? Yikes.
To me, it's more a case of sort of, the 1980s called, they want their criminal justice policy back, sort of thing. It's, and he came up,
which I like.
Oh yeah, like he came up in this very tough on crime, throw them all, put them all in jail, throw away the key kind of thing. And it seems to me that that's not the direction we're moving in. And I think, especially on drug issues, for very good reasons. Before he was a named attorney general, before President Trump was elected, there was maybe it's a little optimistic, but an emerging consensus that we needed to re-examine some of these drug laws that were passed in the 80s and the early 90s, because they were too draconian. They were actually counterproductive in a lot of ways, essentially. But Sessions, being attorney general, sort of stopped all that dead in its tracks. And so I would be surprised if whoever takes over would be anywhere near as sort of hard line as Sessions is on that. And so in that sense, I see that there's almost nowhere to go but up on that. But on the other hand, while Sessions was so totally hardcore and by the book, and while in some ways I saw that as a detriment, when it comes to the Mueller investigation, I think the same sort of principles that made him so by the book when it comes to immigration, these other things, and unwilling to look the other way, those were the same principles that made him say, I have to recuse myself from this.
He's Joe Friday, man. He's,
Exactly. So,
I want to point. I mean, you said, listen, there are issues with our sentencing policy, and I think you're absolutely right. but it's not the attorney general's job to decide what the law those laws ought to be. That's up to Congress. The attorney general's job is to enforce what's on the books.
But there is, right? I
And again,
mean,
that's what I sort of appreciate. That
but I mean, I guess I'm saying that you can make a reasonable argument that under the Obama administration, prosecutorial discretion was abused.
yes,
And I'm actually not unsympathetic to that argument, but you can also say that you don't simply ignore the fact that there is prosecutorial discretion. I mean, there's a happy medium sort of way, and I think that while the Obama administration in some areas may have erred too far on one side, I think under Jeff Sessions, perhaps there was too much error on just ignoring any kind of discretion and saying we're just going to enforce this hardcore 100% zero tolerance.
yeah, all right. That's a fair criticism.
Yeah, kind of a judgment call,
But,
obviously.
yeah.
But yeah. Well, let's move on to another, speaking of zero tolerance and asylum and all that kind of stuff. On Friday, President Trump signed a proclamation that denied the right to apply for asylum to immigrants who cross into the United States illegally, though with an exception for children who cross without their parents.
Okay.
Now, the proclamation cited border security as well as what they characterized as the essentially automatic release of large number of asylum applicants into the United States, often for years, essentially, until their cases can be heard as the reasons for this proclamation. And the president also directed his administration to committing additional resources to the border to help process the flood of asylum applicants that we've seen in the last few years. So, Jay, what do you think? Is this a sensible move or another example of anti-immigrant overreach by President Trump?
Let me guess where you're going. No, I think it's pretty sensible. The idea is, and again, let's make sure we all, and you and I know what we're talking about, but I want to show our listeners know. Requesting asylum is something different than, hey, I'm requesting to move into your country, or I'm immigrating. Right. There are defined criteria for what you need to gain asylum, and it's typically you are fleeing some sort of political or religious persecution, or you're a victim of some sort of natural disaster. Or that there is conditions that make it sort of unsafe that you're hounded out of your country, of civil war or whatever. Asylum is not simply I'd like to move to this country because there's better economic opportunities for me. And again, that may be harsh, and someone can make the argument of, well, if your economic opportunities are so limited somewhere else, aren't you really being forced? Isn't that the same as government repression? And you maybe have a good argument there, but that's not what the statute says.
And I will say that under the Obama administration, the grounds for granting asylum were interpreted more liberally, no pun intended, than Jeff Sessions basically said we're going to be very, very conservative and very, very strict in how we interpret. And then there is some, we should say that in deciding these claims, the Attorney General essentially has just about the last word on these things. He has an awful lot of discretion. So this is where a case where it really matters who the Attorney General is, and it's not like there's no wiggle room. There's an awful lot of room in here, and we saw very different interpretations from Obama to the Trump administration on this.
Well, and I would argue that the Obama interpretations sort of abandoned the statute, right? I mean, there's one thing to say interpretations and exercising discretion. It's another to say, look, we're just not going to, enforce the parts of the law we don't like. But I mean, what Trump is saying is listen, there's a process for applying for asylum, and it is you go to a official point of entry and you say, hi, I'm here to seek asylum, and you go through an application process, and then you are enrolled in that application process. And he's saying this should not apply to people who cross illegally. And again, seeking asylum is legal. If you do that, you are sort of legally entitled to be here while that case is being decided.
And just to be clear on that, Jay, that applies under current law. That applies regardless of how you've entered the country, whether it's legally or not. And that's the change, saying that, well, if you're entering legally, we're just going to essentially summarily deny that claim for asylum.
Exactly.
And so that is actually in violation of law, but the president has the authority citing national security reasons, which, okay, you can't see me roll my eyes here, but there you go. But yeah, and so I just want to be clear on that.
So, well, I would argue his authority exceeds national security. I think. Hang on, I had the language in front of me here, but my phone went off.
But while you're looking for that, I will say that I would encourage everyone to actually read the proclamation. When I did read it, a couple things occurred to me. Number one, clearly the president did not write this proclamation, because it was actually very sort of sober and very clearly and rationally argued and so forth. It was about the most un-Trumpian thing that you could possibly imagine. So it's worth reading, I think, just for that. So someone clearly gave this to him and he signed it. But also, I felt like it made some fairly reasonable points. Now, to me, if I knew nothing else but was in this proclamation, I would say, well, this seems pretty reasonable. But to me, a lot really rests on that committing additional resources to the border to kind of deal with this flood of asylum applicants. Now, if I thought that there was going to be a truly good faith effort to do this to the extent that it needs to be done, I would probably feel, I would feel a lot differently about this, but I don't know that that's going to be the case. And I really hesitate to assume bad faith, because that's not how I like to argue. So I'm basing this in part on the president's rhetoric, essentially, don't let these people in, that sort of thing. So it's hard for me to assume good faith on the part of the president here. And that's kind of why I'm arguing from this position.
Okay. So here I found it.
Okay,
it
go ahead.
says, the president may, by proclamation, that's what he did,
yep,
and for such period as he shall deem necessary, suspend the entry of all aliens, or any class of aliens as immigrants or non-immigrants, and that would be asylum seekers, or impose on the entry of aliens any restrictions he may deem to be appropriate.
Yeah. And so, I mean,
that's pretty broad.
Yeah, and I think that as a general rule that, the benefit of the doubt goes to the president on this, because there was this assumption that, of course, the president would use this in a wise and judicious type of manner and so forth. Now, my sense of how this played out is that the president said,
"Is it injudicious to say we want the people who are seeking asylum to go to the places where they're supposed to go to sign up for asylum,
and again,
just run across the border?"
Yeah, and if you read the proclamation, it seems like a fairly judicious type of statement. Now, my sense of how this played out is that the president said, "What do I need to do to keep them all out?" And they said, well, you can write this proclamation. I'll do that. Yeah, okay, I'll do that. And then at the rallies, I'll say, we're keeping them all out. But I guess the point being is, to me, the crux of this matter focuses on the system, the horribly broken system we have set up to deal with these claims. Right now, we just a few days ago, in fact, or a week ago, we just reached a combined case backlog for asylum claims of over 1 million. I think right now it's like 1.1 million cases. Now, I would love to see a bipartisan bill that would give us the capacity to clear this backlog in a reasonable amount of time, and also that would ensure that all cases could be heard within, say, 3 to 4 weeks of application. And not only that, but that would provide reasonable facilities to hold in a humane manner asylum seekers while they're waiting for their cases to be decided. We don't have anything close to that. Now, the administration has been working on increasing the number of immigration law judges, and those are positions that are named by the Attorney General. And it's gone up a bit since the start of the Trump administration. But right now, to give you a sense, there are just under 400 immigration judges dealing with that combined caseload of 1.1 million cases. I mean, that's insane. That's just totally untenable. And until we deal with that, this is not going to get any better. And that, I think, is where Congress has fallen down, because ultimately you're going to need to appropriate a fair amount of money to deal with this sort of thing. And that's what I think the responsible thing to do is, and that's what I want to see Congress do.
So, all right, I'd say you're not necessarily wrong on let's make sure we have the resources to deal with this. But the other big gaping hole that we need to plug is the way this asylum process works. And that, what has happened, and those numbers sort of testify to it, is that you can go get around the regular U.S. immigration process by simply showing up and saying, I claim asylum.
Or I'm asking to claim asylum.
I'm
yes.
asking for asylum. And the result is, as the president has said, it's a catch and release type situation. You come in, and well, if you show up for your hearing, great. If you don't, you don't.
And most people do.
We'll deny your asylum, but then you're still here.
Sure.
And that's a gaping hole. I think this step, saying, listen, we're going to automatically deny asylum to people if you don't go through the right process, enter at the right port of entry. I think that's a good first step in sorting this out.
Yeah, and I think it's horribly incomplete. And I think a president who truly cared about something more than just keeping out those people would have combined this with a strong call for some measures along the lines of what I talked about. But I don't think the president cares about that one whit.
Well, he's also called for a wall, which would
exactly. So yeah,
I think he's proposed a solution. It's just not the solution you'd like.
Yeah, well, I don't think it's the humane solution. I don't think it's a solution that is in keeping with the proudest traditions of this country.
Sure, and I get it, but let's keep in mind. I mean, what's going on right now? It's either, the choice seems to be, we would let in a lot of asylum seekers who tend not to show up for their hearings, and are here, and it's a de facto open border. And that's you would agree with me that we can't have that de facto open border.
Well, it's not I'll say that it's not a de facto open border, given that the vast majority of people who have hearings that are delayed actually do come back and go to their hearings. But I will say that there's a significant amount of what you might call leakage. So
and the vast majority of the claims are denied.
Right, exactly. And so there are obviously some issues with that. But to say that, as the president has said, that Democrats are in favor of open borders is just simply untrue. I didn't say Democrats. No, I'm not saying you're saying it. I'm saying that the president says it. And so, you can look at the proclamation for what it says, and I think that's obviously important. But you also have to look at it in the context of what the president has said more generally. And so that was my point when looking at just the proclamation, saying, well, okay, this seems reasonable. So if, for instance, President Kasich had signed this proclamation, so I'd be like, well, okay, let's see how this works out. This seems reasonable. But it wasn't President Kasich. It's President Trump. And based on what I know about President Trump, that's my concern. And I think it's a reasonable concern.
But that's all right. I'll just say that's not the way the law works, right? It's not. It's what is actually in the bill, in the enactment, in the proclamation that counts, and whether you like the guy who proposed it or not, that's sort of a separate question.
Yeah,
his authority doesn't. You're not arguing he somehow would lack the authority because his heart isn't in the right place.
No, not at all. What I guess what I'm saying, and maybe I'm being unclear, is I'm not talking about because I don't like the guy. What I'm saying is I think that if a well-intentioned president would have, even whose views I disagree with, would have proposed this and had sincerely made an effort to kind of lead a legislative charge to try to fix the system, to again kind of be in keeping with those traditions of
i.e. a wall.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's my point, is that it seems to me that the president is trying to craft as much as possible just to keep those people out. And I think, even the tradition in this country, even the Republican tradition, really, in many ways, was to actually welcome people.
Oh, absolutely.
And
I am all for welcoming immigrants,
but
I'm for welcoming immigrants in an orderly orderly manner,
I am too.
done by law.
I am too. You and I agree, I think, very much on this, and I think that's where we part ways with the president on this,
Yeah.
basically. And so I see this as just the president just trying to find one more way to keep people he doesn't like out of his country, essentially. And I think he probably
All
sees
right.
it as a sort of proprietary sort of way. But all right, then. Well, I think that kind of clears up our story backlog. I'm glad we got a chance to talk about those two things. So that does it for this episode. Thanks everyone for listening. We do hope you like what you heard. And hey, if you do like what you heard, listener support is what keeps the show going. We really appreciate it. There are two ways to support the show. Well, there are probably at least half a dozen I can think of too, Jay. One is, of
The two
course,
big ones.
give us a little bit of money. That really helps. It's not free to do this. And so if you can support the show financially, we really do appreciate it. Just go to politicsguys.com/support, and that'll take you to what you need to do. Also, if you can't afford to support the show, we totally get that. But sharing these episodes, subscribing to the show, telling people about the show, that helps us out a ton. So if you can do that, that would be great. And finally, if you got a question, comment, just want to hear us kind of hold forth on something you have to say, let us know. Send us an email at mail@politicsguys.com. You can also message us at our Facebook page, and we have all kinds of discussions about Jeff Sessions and asylum and immigration throughout the week. And that's facebook.com/politicsguys page. And we're also on Twitter at politicsguys. The executive producers of the Politics Guys are Michael Baranowski, Jay Carson, Trey Orndorff, Will Miller, and Bruce Johnson. Today's show is produced by Michael Baranowski. We'll be back with a new show on Saturday. We hope you'll join us.